All right, boys. We're going in.
So I just like to at least state my opinion clearly, but what is it that you find so troubling?
What makes Jontron stand out among the many contenders Destiny has talked to is the manner in which Jontron attempts to defend his beliefs. Despite being of Iranian descent, Jontron seems to hold certain beliefs that are more commonly found in groups that advocate for white supremacy.
Let's start there.
I guess it's kind of this general vague defense of Western, or more specifically like American culture.
Right.
Basically, the problem I'm getting into is every time I read things, and I know that you're going to take extreme disagreement with this, every time I read things, what it always seems to boil down to is I think that this thing is better because it's majority white, and I don't want that to change. And that's like the most important thing. That's how it seems to read out to me that way.
Okay, so that is one way that you might look at the way that I mean, obviously you can take that from it, but that's really not the core argument. The core argument is that no other nation would voluntarily change its demographics. Now, people say, "Oh, demographics? What do you mean? It's not a white country or something like that, or demographics don't matter." But if this were true, they wouldn't have such an easy time turning around and identifying who's the problem. The quote unquote white male. They have
So
no problem identifying it then.
Hindsight allows us to recognize that Jontron's nervous laughter is simply a display of insecurity. He seems to be worried about how his statements would come across, as he doesn't want to be labeled a racist.
It's
I mean,
only
well,
when
in terms of the problem, I mean, I think it depends on what particular thing you're talking about. But I guess so to look at that first statement. So to kind of start this off, I'm not comparing us to any other country in the world. I think that the United States of America is relatively unique in its identity, and that we don't really have and we don't have like an ethnic background that is tied to our country.
You'll come to notice that Destiny will attempt to prevent Jontron from going off on tangents any time he has the slightest chance to do so. Going off on tangents is a recurring theme in debates. It is especially pronounced when one side feels incapable of adequately debating the topic at hand. Some psychologists would view this as a form of denial and also a subconscious coping mechanism that would allow them to retain their worldview even if it is completely devoid of logic.
Does that make sense? As in, like, we're not
yeah,
like
well,
if you're from
it's
France, you can be French. If you're from Italy, you can be Italian, German. You can be German, Polish, like actual ancestry dating back hundreds and hundreds of years. Typically, as Americans, we are Eurocentric, right, in our ancestry.
yeah. Well, that's what I'm saying. It's the USA as the proposition nation, but it is a European nation historically. There's just no debating that. When people try to debate that, yeah, there was obviously the slave population who lived here, brought here against their
Sure.
will. They
So
were emancipated,
the
of
the
course.
first
Yeah.
thing that you just said doesn't really make sense. It was a European nation. Like in the late 1800s and the early 1900s, Italians and Irishmen were discriminated against like massively coming to the United States. Like they were called,
Okay,
I think Irish people were called the inside out Negroes. Like it was like it,
they they're still European though.
yeah, but I'm saying that we didn't see it that way going back, 150
Well,
years in the
there's
United
no.
States. It's like, well, they're European, they're okay. Like that's not how we saw it. Like,
Well, we weren't there at that time. I mean, I was born in 1990.
Jontron's dialogue alters from his birth history and his percentage of whiteness before moving on to the radical left and identity politics. Bear in mind, he wasn't asked about any of this.
Well past the. I mean, my dad is Persian. My mom is Hungarian. I'm not. I'm not even 100% white. I'm just saying this as a matter of fact. So when I see bullshit, I just know it.
well,
And
what do you mean by matter of fact? What I'm saying is that as time has gone on, we've seen more and more people be included in the identity of what it means to be an American. So it seems strange that today there's like this massive pushback on who can become included in that demographic. That just seems kind of
okay, I
strange to me.
understand. I understand what you're saying. Well, none of this would have ever been a problem had I guess you could call them the extreme left, started bringing identity politics to the fore. Because when you have a nation is supposed to be a people that are all bound by at least culture, if not genetics or whatever you want to say. So, we're all supposed to feel um, like we're one people. But they started doing this thing where they were like, well, if you're black, you're here. If you're white, you're here. If you're,
Okay,
they
so
basically.
okay, so again, like I know these are a lot of like hot button talking points, but like when you say the left started identity politics by assigning white and black to certain areas, I would say that Jim Crow laws probably assigned white and black people to different areas more so than a Black Lives Matter speaker or Obama talking about a racial issue.
Destiny nudges him back to the subject of Jim Crow laws once more. He is trying to figure out if Jontron understands that segregation of communities is not a recent phenomena brought upon by the quote-unquote radical left.
I don't agree with this narrative that all of a sudden the left has brought out, identity politics. Like, if you talk to minorities in the United States, identity politics has been part of their national identity for the past, since the inception of the United States.
I just don't know that. Well, I just don't know that it's on the same level, especially because.
Well, it's not. It's on a much lesser level than it used to be. We don't have Jim Crow laws anymore. We don't. Women's suffrage happened.
You're right, and people still manage to create divisions between themselves.
Well, because there still exist divisions. Black people are disproportionately represented in prisons. Women are disproportionately represented in certain workplaces.
Okay, but the argument is that it's white people who caused them to be in those places. That's the implicit argument, not that they have any agency of their own to.
Who do you think was responsible for Jim Crow laws?
Well, of course it was white people, of course. I'm not arguing for Jim Crow.
Okay, well, no, I'm just saying that when you say something like that, like, well, people are blaming white people, which is absurd. Well, I mean, if you go back 50 to 100 years, yeah, it was kind of white people that did it. Now, I'm not saying that we need to lock white people up now or bring back reparations or anything, but it seems like the big problem, and I notice this a lot because I watched pretty much your entire discussion with Sargon, is that I know that there are extremists on the left that want to play the blame game and do that fucking white guilt bullshit. I'm not into that shit. I'm not that extreme. Like, white people need to, bow their heads and be solemn everywhere and recognize their privilege all the time. Like, I think that's stupid. But it's difficult sometimes to have a conversation about these topics when a lot of white people won't even acknowledge that they exist. When you get white people that say things like, well, I'm pretty sure I could go through your Twitter and find things like reverse racism is a real thing, and white genocide exists today in America and everybody hates the white man. Like, those are pretty charged statements when you have people that are alive today in their 60s who were legally discriminated against in their childhood. Like, those are pretty extreme statements,
Well, if we are going to acknowledge one side, well, this is always a one-sided thing, because if you don't agree that whites are the primary cause of dysfunction in certain communities, like it has to stem back to Jim Crow, it has to stem back to slavery. Well, I don't know that these arguments can hold up decade after decade. So
Jim
I think
Crow
that's
wasn't
where people.
That long ago, though. Like, when you say a statement like that, like, that's
Okay, but there's people who are like 18 years old who are committing a disproportionate amount of crime, and they were born after me. So how do you explain that? Is that Jim Crow?
How?
Jontron brings up the fact that black people born after Jim Crow laws still commit crime as a kind of gotcha statement. This is the first time that Destiny is unable to come up with a response, as he is momentarily stunned by Jontron's lack of intelligence. Jontron, however, mistakes Destiny's silence as tacit agreement and feels emboldened enough to double down on his beliefs.
Okay,
Nobody wants to get into the realistic things. They say you want to have a conversation, but they don't really want to have a conversation. They just want to blame whites more and more. And the more
All right, if you had a daughter that was 18 years old, would you send her to hang out with 400 guys that were all like known like fucking juggalos or people that rape people or whatever all the time? Would you have her hang out in that environment?
No,
probably not, right? If you had a friend and he had 30 friends that were meth heads, right? Would you be happy with him hanging out with all of these people constantly? Like, no, probably not, right? But the argument I'm getting to is that your environment shapes you a lot, right? If you have a family that dates back, hundreds of years, if you've got parents that help you, parents that take care of you, like, these things have a major impact of your life. If you have grandparents that were directly impacted by Jim Crow, you have parents that were born to people that were directly, discriminated against by the state. I mean, we're not that far removed from these issues. It's not like, well, my grandparents dealt with this. Do we really have, like, we still deal with the Red Scare in the West,
Okay, well, the United Kingdom didn't have Jim Crow. France didn't have Jim Crow. We still have riots. We still have Muslim riots over there. And in Sweden, they didn't have Jim Crow. There's still riots in the streets of Stockholm and Malmo and wherever else. So you're telling me that...
I'm just speaking...
So at what point do we... So Jim Crow... One aspect of it here in America, but as far as the rest of the Western world, we don't have these same precedents, and there's
I only want to speak
crime in those communities.
I only want to speak in regards to the United States, because everything else is way more complicated. When you get into the histories of other countries and Islam and in the Europe and everything, that's all different countries, or that's all different countries and different topics. So in the United States, I'm not trying to say that no black person is ever responsible for any of their actions whatsoever. I'm just saying that it bothers me sometimes when I listen to internet celebrities get together and talk about how irresponsible black people are, when so many of them are born to single parent households.
No. With... Like, it's not as if we're saying, like, all black people are irresponsible. That's ridiculous. I mean, that is truly bigoted.
The amount of cognitive dissonance Jontron seems to display here is really quite impressive. He believes that it would be truly bigoted to say that black people as a whole are a group of irresponsible people. However, his earlier statements seem to indicate that he believes people of color across countries such as France, UK and Sweden are to blame for riots and high crime rates.
I'm just saying, like, you can't make the argument that whites should be okay with them being becoming a minority in the countries that their ancestors built if it doesn't apply to other countries.
Wait, hold on. Whoa, we're getting way different. Hold on. White minority versus other countries. Okay, here, I'll write this down. We're not quite on that topic yet. I'm just saying that if you're not acknowledging that there are problems that exist in these communities, you'll never be able to fix it, right? And one of the big problems I had when I talked with Sargon was this idea that, like, black people just need to fix themselves. Like, I mean, sure, you can say that, but this is going to take a lot longer to get these communities on board when they were aggravated by white communities for so long. You can't just tell a group of people that have been oppressed historically in the United States for hundreds of years, you know, over the course of a generation to just fix their shit. Like, it doesn't work that way, you know?
I don't understand why it is anyone else's responsibility but their own. Do they not have agency? Why is it why should someone else deal with these problems? I mean, that's basically what people are asking of this.
Because we live in a civilization where we all help each other and we have to exist with one another.
Recently, we haven't been acting that way, have we? So
recently we have been. We live in an unprecedented period of human history where more people than ever are surviving childbirth, less people than ever are dying in natural disaster, more people than ever are moving into middle classes all around the world. That's not true. We've absolutely been helping each other. And the thing is, even if you're a selfish person, this benefits you. Why are you moving to the United States and not staying in Iran? Probably because there's more people doing well in the United States, so there's more opportunity for you here than there is in Iran, right? When everybody in the US does better, everybody does better, right? If black communities and Mexican communities get more money.
Of course.
So, well, you're saying of course now, but then earlier you're like, well, why should we help anybody else? Because you don't want to live in a shitty country with.
That's not what I'm saying.
Jontron seems to have forgotten that he is being recorded and that his words can be played back at any given moment. Let's try to rewind the tape a bit and see what he said a few minutes ago. This debate technique that Jontron has employed is known as the shaggy defense.
Why should someone else deal with these problems? I mean, that's basically what people are asking of this.
Because we live in a civilization where we all help each other and we have to exist with one another.
Recently, we haven't been acting that way, have we? I'm saying they're turning everyone against each other, and so.
Well, but you're saying that, but it's like it feels like if you point out a problem, the right is so quick to go, well, hold on, you're turning us all against each other. Well, no, we're just acknowledging a problem, and now we need to fix it.
I would argue that I don't know. I don't want to get too raunchy with this, but I think what I'm saying is that nobody would ask Japan if it was okay that Japan become a minority Japanese nation.
But we're not Japan, and I don't care about Japan. And also, Japan is one of the most racist fucking countries in the world. Do you want to be like Japan?
This word racist, what does it mean?
Jontron attempts to win the debate by making the viewers fall into an existential crisis by having them ponder about what the term racist actually means. Jontron has employed a very high-level technique here. He is essentially trying to lower Destiny's IQ by asking insane questions. In fact, this technique is so effective that I myself seem to have fallen prey to this. I am unable to analyze this debate any further since I have lost the 2 brain cells I had before I watched this debate. I just hope that my subscribers are still intelligent enough to know how to put their pants on after watching this masterpiece. I'm sorry that I have to sign off now, but I guess I have no other option. If I continued to analyze this debate, I'm afraid that someone in chat might have an aneurysm.